Zoom recording. Okay. All right. Thank you guys for joining us. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about counseling or therapy. For us, it's the same word with therapist or counselor. It's the same thing. And other similar professions. This presentation was actually made for us by Chan Balwant. She's an advisor in COSIS, but she was in the Counselor Ed Masters when she made this. So she was working on becoming a licensed mental health counselor because she was doing the clinical mental health counseling masters. And then when she graduated, she ended up getting a job at COSIS. So we're excited that she's still, in a way, still part of our psychology team. So it's cool. And helping me today, if for you guys that haven't met me before, I'm Erin. I've been an academic advisor in the Advising Center for about 10 years now. Helping me today is Morgan. Morgan Stepp is, what's your title, Morgan? I'm sorry.
Office Support Assistant.
I never remember that title. I apologize. Morgan is in the Counselor Ed program right now, but she's focusing on school counseling. So she's going to help me today because she knows maybe a little bit more about, especially the mental health counseling masters or the Counselor Ed masters that she could contribute. So we're going to work on this presentation together as well. And then if you have questions, please use the chat. Our peer advisor, Jennifer, is going to answer questions in the chat as best as she can. And we're going to address those questions at the end of the presentation. So I appreciate you guys holding your questions towards the end. Well, you don't have to hold it really because you can ask in the chat and we'll get to them again. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started.
Okay, so the first slide that we want to go over is common professions for counseling and other helping roles. So we just have a small list here of the common professions. So we have the licensed mental health counselor, a substance abuse counselor, a rehabilitation counselor, a marriage and family therapist, or could be called a marriage and family counselor. Like Erin mentioned, counselor and therapist is interchangeable. A licensed clinical social worker, an applied behavioral analysis, a school counselor, and a school psychologist. Finding out what field is the best for you, really look at different professionals in the field, talk with them, try and get experience with them to figure out what's going to be the best fit for you. Some of these professions can be similar to one another, so really speaking to people who are working in that field is going to be important when deciding which route is the best.
And Morgan and I were looking at this list before, and I was worried that there was more counselors, and there might be more counselors. They might have a different title. So just keep that in mind. If you meet a therapist or counselor, they might just have a different title, but they might do the same thing as an LMHC or LCSW. So it's something to look into and ask around about too. So a really big question we get is, what's the difference between a counselor and a psychologist? Now, I am neither a counselor nor a psychologist, but I will answer the best that I can from what I've learned over, the 10 years that I've been in this field. So a counselor is a therapist. You just need your master's degree, so 2 to 3 years, focuses on applying counseling techniques. A psychologist is someone that gets their doctorate, either their PhD or their PsyD, and they do apply, but they are doing research as well. They're doing research on these counseling techniques and learning about what works better to help their clients. And to be a psychologist, you do need to attend an APA accredited doctorate program, whether it's a PsyD or PhD. Psychology, also the doctorate program, you earn your master's along the way in the first 2 years, and then you finish the dissertation in the rest of the 5 years, really, because the program's like 5 to 7 years, so around there. Some students do finish at the master's that they're like, okay, I don't really want to do the doctorate, I want to just finish the master's. It just depends on who you are. So again, psychologist is someone that does more research, and so they will need research experience, whereas a counselor or therapist is someone just really does more of the applied, the practical experience. Now, there's another field called a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is someone that's gone to medical school and focused in psychiatry. and they prescribe medication for their mental health. From what I've heard, psychiatrists don't really do therapy as much as they're just there to prescribe the medicine and understand that part that's going to help mental health. So typically they will refer to a psychologist or a therapist to do the therapy for their clients, even if they're prescribing medication. Or a counselor or psychologist will refer the client to a psychiatrist if they feel that medication is something that's going to help the client, the patient. You don't need your doctorate to have your own practice. You can get your own practice with just your master's degree, or you can work for an agency. That's something else that you can look into. So don't feel like you have to be a psychologist or psychiatrist to open up your own place. You can do that with just a master's degree too. And then I also wanted to talk about the difference between counselors and social workers. So from my understanding, honestly, a clinical social worker, someone that has their MSW, their master's in social work, is still very similar to a therapist, someone that has their master's in mental health counseling or marriage and family therapy. They still require pretty much the same licensure, but with different accrediting bodies. But I feel like social workers take a step above just the therapy and also provide assistance with finding social services. So this presentation shows connecting clients with like housing assistance and different groups, helping to improve, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Finding other resources that's going to help improve the client's lives. So I feel like social workers do almost a little bit more. And honestly, in my experience, social workers and therapists make the same. I've also met a lot of students that have a stigma about social work because maybe they're thinking of like a caseworker that works for DCF. And as someone who's adopted their son from DCF, like I know a little bit more about that. It's just a different field. To be a caseworker, you just need your bachelor's degree, whereas this is someone that actually has their master's in social work. They can do therapy. They don't need to do therapy with children or work in DCF. They can work and have their own practice or work for an agency. They can work for the hospital. There's lots of different places that clinical social workers work. So I always like to talk to students about trying to remove that stigma. I don't know why people think of that, I guess, stuff in the media. That's something different. So if you are interested in clinical social work, it's actually a growing field, and there's more opportunities for social workers with government agencies typically. So something I hope you guys will look into if you're interested in being a therapist.
All right, next we're going to talk about accreditation and licensure. So most of these helping professions require a master's degree, but the requirements may differ based on each particular job title. So for example, different programs require different requirements to be considered accredited and to allow you to gain licensure. Sorry, I just want to read what this said. So for example, the Council for Accreditation of Counseling follows the CACREP program. So what that means is basically just a program that the graduate program follows to make sure that they're meeting all the requirements, that says basically if the student completes all of these requirements, they will be an expert in the field, and then they can gain licensure or accreditation. You don't have to attend an accredited program to be licensed. Just make sure that your graduate program meets the state licensing requirements. These accreditations are something that most programs have to apply for. So not all schools may have applied for it yet, but you just want to make sure that the school that you're looking at is following those state licensure so that you can be licensed in the state once you graduate. So like I mentioned, we have CACREP for counseling, counselor education programs, COAMFTE, the Commission on Accreditation for Marriage and Family Therapy Education, and then CSWE, which is the Council of Social Work Education.
Something that's interesting about accreditation is that, and I guess I can talk about this when I get to the master's programs for UCF. Is that my next slide even? Oh, it is. Cool. So this relates. So for CACREP, our master's in clinical mental health counseling in the counselor ed is CACREP accredited. So great. It's an awesome program. We're like one of the top 20 in the nation. So really cool program, but I get a huge question of what's the difference between mental health counseling program and the clinical psych masters? And for me, there's not too much different, except for technically the clinical psych masters is not accredited with KCREP. They're working on getting their own accreditation, but like Morgan had said, accreditation is not the point. It's about, are you going to be meeting your state's requirements for licensure, which of course our clinical psych masters will get you there too. So these are counseling related graduate programs that we have specifically at UCF. Only the clinical psych masters is under the realm of psychology. That program is actually located at the Sanford campus. I guess it's online now, right? Everything's online. But typically it's at the Sanford campus. And the clinical psych masters has a new track for a thesis that is recommended if your goal is a doctorate, is to do that thesis track. That's different than going the state licensure counseling track. So if you really want to go your doctorate, but you need a building master's, I actually recommend the clinical psych masters with the thesis track, or surprisingly, in my opinion, the clinical social work masters can be a step towards the doctorate in clinical psych, if that's something you're interested in down the road. So the Counselor Ed Masters here at UCF breaks down into mainly 3 different areas. They have the clinical mental health counseling to prepare you to be a licensed mental health counselor. They have the school counseling masters, of course, to prepare you to be a school counselor. That's what Morgan's doing. They also have the marriage and family track. So if you know specifically you want to work with like couples or groups and family and children, then that might be one you want to do, though you could work with those clients even with the clinical mental health counseling or the clinical psych or the clinical social work. Now, the one we haven't really mentioned yet is school psychology. Now, school psychology program here at UCF is an EDS. It's a specialist degree. It's actually above a master's degree, but not quite a doctorate. But I think you're still essentially still called a school psychologist or maybe a school specialist. From my understanding, school specialists work in the school system, in the K through 12 system, administering tests to see if the students need additional help with learning, if they have a learning disability or anything like that, and to help give them the plan to be on track. They don't necessarily do therapy with children, is from my experience. If you really want to do therapy with children, I would say look at any of the other master's programs other than school counseling. Because same thing with school counselors don't necessarily do therapy with kids. Morgan, maybe can you mention a little bit what's the difference between like a school counselor then if they're not doing therapy with kids, what are they doing with the kids in the school?
Well, actually, we are certified counselors, and the intent is to do therapy in the school setting.
See, I'm glad you're here.
Unfortunately, the idea has kind of gone away from that. Most school counselors are seen more as guidance counselors. So in the elementary setting, you have a lot of social emotional therapy going on because students aren't really needing academic help really at the elementary level. There's not really schedule planning or things like that going on. So at the elementary level, school counselors are doing a lot of social emotional, small groups, individual groups, classroom guidance lessons, things like that. In middle school, you have a mix of social emotional counseling with a lot of transitions from elementary to middle school, or then middle school to high school coming up. But you also have more of career counseling to talk about what their interests are and figure that out so they can kind of narrow down what they want to study when they get to high school, and and academic counseling as well, which is looking at their schedule planning and things like that. Then when you get to high school is where you think of your typical guidance counselor, someone who's just helping you with academics, college planning, career planning, things like that. They do some social emotional counseling, but they're just honestly extremely overworked, so they're not able to, and their focus is on getting the students to graduate. So hopefully with the way that the accreditation for school counseling through ASCA is going, which is their like school counselor association, it will be more therapy based, but as of right now, it is not.
I'm hoping now that they're having the school counselors refer students to
Right.
therapist and
And
getting
that's what
help.
they're doing. A lot of schools have like mental health counselors or a safe coordinator or even like a social worker on campus that they're referring them to
Mhm.
um, for more of the long-term mental health needs.
Oh, good. Cool. Thank you. I'm glad I said something because you know more about it than I do. Okay, next one. That's you.
Sorry, my mouth was dry. So the question that a lot of people ask is, I want to work with a specific population. What program should I be looking for? So some people think they want to be a counselor, but they specifically want to work with people struggling with addiction. So they have to look for a program that specifies in addiction counseling. That's not necessarily true. You can still find a way to specialize with populations in any general counseling, therapy, or social work program. So just some tips over here on the side. You will be networking with your faculty in these graduate programs who may have the same area of interest as you and can help you develop your style. For example, I had a professor who has a strong interest in working with HIV positive clients, and they have a whole club that they have dedicated to doing research on that. So anyone interested in that has joined and is now kind of navigating their interest in that. So you're going to work with different professors, different students as well who have different interests that are going to help you tailor what you want to do. You typically find and enhance your niche while in your grad school. You will then start tailoring your papers and presentations to your specialty area. Most grad programs do an overview of of everything that you can do with a counseling degree or a social work program or whatever it might be. And then it's up to you to start looking at what your interests are. And then like this says, tailoring your assignments and things towards that. And then it's important to remember that as a new counselor, therapist, or social worker, you don't usually get to choose the population or your style of therapy. You rarely immediately know your client's diagnosis before they walk into the first therapy session. So even if you are interested in working with clients who struggle with addiction, that may not be all that you're doing. And so you don't want to expect that you only have clients with addiction. You may also see clients with anxiety or depression and things like that, because you're not necessarily going to know their diagnosis before they walk in. Another thing to look at that Erin and I talked about is like you may want to work with specifically children, but like Erin mentioned, a lot of that is also working with the parents if they're under the age of 18. So it's just something to keep in mind that you're not specifically going to have one population and only stick with them. It's going to branch out in different ways as well.
Yeah, I know that from experience when my son was getting therapy from his licensed clinical social work therapist when he was adopted and moved in, was that, yeah, she worked with him and she tried to work with him one-on-one, but at the time he was only 7, so there's only so much talk therapy they can do. So they did a lot of play therapy and fun stuff like that, but she definitely worked with us a lot, especially as we were new parents. So just keep that in mind that if yes, you want to work with children, you love children, that's great, but you still got to work with the adults too. Let's see, preparing for grad school. So some grad programs will have specific prereqs. For example, the clinical psych master's or doctorate is going to require at least essentially a psych minor. So if you've never taken any psych classes, then you're going to need courses for that. But the other counseling related degrees we've noticed doesn't really necessarily need a specific prerequisite class, especially if you are a psych major, which most of you are. You're not going to really need to take any additional specific prereq classes to apply towards these programs. Some states do require that you have a teaching background. You've been a teacher for so many years to apply for school counseling, but that's pretty much the only prereqs that we've come across, and not Florida. Florida doesn't need that, for example.
Okay, so talking about gaining relevant experience, When it comes to the helping field, really any experience relating to working with or helping others is beneficial. Obviously, when we think of relevant experience, the first thing that comes to most of our minds is like volunteering with a mental health agency or things like that. But even something as simple as having like an after school job as a waiter or a hostess or a bartender can be relevant experience because you're working with people, you're talking to people, you're building connections, and helping others. So while mental health experience will be great, you can always kind of morph your relevant experience into something more relevant when it comes to the helping field. Many states can certify individuals who don't have a master's degree in counseling related positions. Erin, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more on this. I don't have a lot of information on.
I'm not familiar either. So this is guys where you'll have to actually go find some counselors and interact with them. The only thing I can think of is like substance abuse counseling, like it's listed. Say you work with AA, but typically those people that work as substance abuse counselors without the master's degree do it because they themselves had substance abuse problems. That they went through AA themselves. And so now they coach and encourage and counsel others going through the experience. So typically, unless you've already had substance abuse experience, I would say definitely go through the master's degree and get licensed as much as possible. Don't look at the internet that says, oh yeah, you can be a substitute counselor with just your bachelor's degree. That's not necessarily true.
Okay, thank you. Look into your state's Department of Mental Health. I know here in Central Florida, specifically in Orlando, we have the Mental Health Association for volunteered or paid positions. Places like this are nonprofits that are in dire need of help. Nonprofits typically don't have a large budget, but they still want to be able to help as many people as possible. So that's where volunteers come in most of the time to help get mental resources out to the community. And then if you're interested in school counseling, you'll want to get involved in the K through 12 system. Here it shows the example of substitute teaching. Right now, that could be a little bit difficult just because of everything that's going on with COVID. A lot of schools aren't allowing volunteers. But if you can get in with as a substitute or in like an after school program, or whenever schools start to open back up to volunteers, volunteering in classrooms will be really beneficial. And then we also have relevant internships or volunteering experience. So just kind of going along with what I just talked about. These are some local organizations. If you're interested in the helping profession in any sense, I definitely recommend looking these up. They typically have volunteers or interns and partnerships with UCF. So the first one is Aspire Health Partners. It is a mental health public agency. They have mental health hospitals, a couple of them across Central Florida, Children's Home Society of Florida, the Center, Zebra Coalition, and I believe both the Center and Zebra Coalition are LGBTQ plus organization. So if you have an interest in that, definitely look that up. The Mental Health Association of Central Florida, Harbor House, which is a women's shelter. So if you have an interest in working with people who have been through domestic violence, that could be of interest to you. Crisis hotlines, Give Kids the World, Musicians on Call. You could become a registered behavior technician. And then, like I mentioned, working in daycare centers, child care nanny, or substitute teacher or school volunteer.
Especially if you want to work with kids, having those jobs with kids or volunteering at Give Kids the World is going to be pretty important to say that you, or the Children's Home Society, to say that you actually have experience with kids. So say you're a parent yourself, that's great, but that's not the same as having experience, I guess, with other kids too. So definitely look for those positions. These are positions that are more relevant here in Central Florida, where UCF is at. So they definitely have probably a connection with UCF. But if you're not in Orlando at the moment, if you're somewhere else in Florida or even outside of Florida, just look for volunteer experiences near you that are similar to these types of organizations. I'm sure you can find something.
Yeah, the Mental Health Association, they typically have one in most major cities across the nation. So definitely look into that if you're not here in Central Florida.
And the cool thing about volunteering in these places is that, yeah, it's probably going to be unpaid, but there is a potential opportunity for a paid position later down the line, or even after you get your bachelor's degree. I have met alumni that used to volunteer with like Harbor House, for example, and they ended up getting a paid position with them after they graduated. So it's definitely a possibility. Here's some other relevant jobs that you can get after your bachelor's degree. So these are good titles for you to look up on like Indeed.com or other search engines for careers. So I definitely hope that you'll look some of these up. Again, we talked about substance abuse counselor and probably even rehab counselor. Those are going to be harder to do without the master's degree, but not impossible. But even doing stuff like crisis intervention, working with, like suicide hotlines, things like that will help open the doors for things like that. Other jobs that you can look into, child life development specialist. That's a pretty popular job for our alumni to work in the hospitals, work with children in that way. Child welfare protection social worker. A board certified assistance behavior analyst is similar to the registered behavior technician that Morgan had mentioned earlier. The RBT job you can get with just your associate's degree, but after your bachelor's degree, you can go a step farther and go get the certification to be an assistant ABA therapist. You could be a teacher with your bachelor's degree in psychology. You can work, like we said, in daycare and childcare and nanny. You could be at least a substitute teacher. Sometimes those part-time jobs like substitute teaching is good for if your goal is to go to grad school, so you can work and do grad school at the same time. You can do caseworker, case manager. That's similar to the child welfare protection social worker, but that's not working with the children then side. Maybe you're going to do that like at the hospital setting. Social human services aide, or even an academic advisor like me at a state college you can do with just your bachelor's degree. It's all about, all these jobs focus on helping people. So these are definitely jobs that you can find with just your bachelor's degree after you graduate. That's going to be relevant. What I recommend now is, like I said, look up these jobs in those job search engines, like Indeed.com is one of my favorites, and find out what the job description entails, what is needed for that job. And those are skills that you can work on now as an undergrad to help land that job after you graduate.
Also, looking, and I know Erin, you've told me this before, looking at LinkedIn and looking through, you can look at it so you can see all UCF's alumni and then put in like different jobs that you might be interested in to see if any UCF alumni are currently working in these positions. And I would recommend, reaching out to them, and if you are interested in asking them about their jobs, how they got there, what their day-to-day looks like, so you can have a better understanding of what would be required of you in this position.
Yeah, 100%. And like we mentioned before, looking at even the other counselors, the types of counselors, you can find UCF alumni that have these titles and reach out to them and ask them about it, and see if they're willing to share some information, or even, kind of connect with them and find yourself a mentor that can continue to guide you as the undergrad, getting into the master's, in the master's program. And then when you're leaving the master's program, so you're looking out for, what's next. Hopefully you can have a mentor that continues to guide you throughout this career path of yours. Well, I think that's our last one, Morgan. I don't know if you wanted to share her quote.
Sure, I'll read it out. The only person who is educated is the one who has learned how to learn and change. That's by Carl Rogers. If you don't know who Carl Rogers is, but you're interested in a counseling field, you will learn. He's a founder of many of the counseling theories and ideas that people practice today.
And Chan, who made this presentation, that's her favorite, I guess, counselor in the field. So she loves to quote him all the time. And I like her little Venn diagram of do what you love, what the world needs, and what you do well. And you can all circle it all together in a career like this. So I thought that was cute. And I wanted to show our website. You guys have probably seen it before. It actually just got updated and is actually still getting updated. So it's kind of like a little work in progress now. Like all the pictures disappeared. So hopefully those come back. We have even more information on preparing for grad school. Some of you guys went to my grad school presentation that we talked about that. You can even go to the clinical psych and listen to Chan do the presentation, or if you do really want your doctorate, listen to this video about me scaring you, because the doctorate's pretty intense. But there's some more information about here. There's even information about the clinical psych masters, stuff like that. So I hope that you'll take a look at that if that's your goal, is to go into counseling or therapy or go to get your doctorate. So next I wanted to see if we could answer some of your questions. So now I got to figure out how to open
I can read the
chat.
message if you'd like.
Oh, I figured it. I got it. We're good. But like maybe we'll swap off on who's answering, or maybe you'll know.
Sure. The first one is from Julia.
Ooh, I want to answer that one. Oh, good. Okay, so Julia asks, is it hard to work in counseling as a licensed clinic? No, you're still working in the field. You're just titled, you're going to be an LCSW instead of LMHC. So depending on what your needs are, that's who you would see. If you're a client, you would say, well, these are the things I need to get addressed. When you're going to look for a therapist yourself, you would look up, okay, am I going to find an LMHC or an LCSW? It just depends on what it is that you need help with. I would say, no, you are still doing counseling therapy, even as an LCSW. You're just also doing resource referral. Would you get passed over a job? It just depends. Honestly, I've seen more jobs for LCSWs than for LMHCs. So from my understanding, there's a lot more positions open for LCSWs. Let's see. Anna asks, do school counselors have a similar job as school psychologists? Maybe Morgan, you could take that one.
Yeah. Some people may think so, but actually not really. So a school counselor is someone who's in the school every single day. They are meeting with students for counseling, like social emotional counseling. They may lead individual sessions, small groups, classroom sessions, and really building a relationship with the student for their time in that school. Whereas a school psychologist may have multiple schools that they go to throughout the week. They may not be set in one school, and they're really doing the testing for the student. So if a student needs to be tested for a learning disability, to have an IEP or a 504 plan, that is the school psychologist job. So they're not really meeting with the student to talk about like feelings and counseling and things like that. They're strictly doing the testing and analyzing those tests to determine what the next step will be for the student.
Thank you. Serena asks, is there a difference between counseling and therapy? No, we use those words interchangeably. It's the same thing whether we say we're doing therapy or we're a therapist, or we're doing counseling, we're a counselor. It's just different. I mean, it's literally the same thing, just a different word, but it means the same. Oh, good. Jennifer answered that too. Good job, Jennifer. Ketter asks, is there a specific track? Yeah, so for your Bachelor's of Science in Psychology, that's your bachelor's degree, you're likely going to be doing the clinical track because that one focuses on mental health. If you noticed in our presentation, I kept using the words clinical mental health counseling, clinical social work, clinical psychology. They're all about mental health. That's what clinical essentially means, is health. But you don't have to do the clinical track. Again, when I mentioned that graduate programs don't really have specified prereqs to apply to them, it doesn't matter. If you ended up doing the industrial organizational psych track, you can still apply to those counseling masters or the clinical psych masters. I think I overheard, oh, okay. Jennifer knew more than me. I thought I heard Give Kids the World was closed for the time being, but that might have been a few months ago. So maybe they've opened up again. I assume they're probably looking for volunteers. So definitely look at their website. Most of those organizations we listed, if you look at their website, they have like a volunteer tab or button that you can look up. Anna asks if school psychologists need a doctorate, and some do. Some have a doctorate program, but like I said, UCF's is a specialist program, so it's not quite a doctorate, but it's also above a master's. So I would say, no, you don't really need the doctorate, but you need to just go to a program that's still going to get you to that career. Morgan, do you have anything else on school psychology?
No, I
No.
use it as much as I know. I
Okay,
do
okay.
it within the counselor education program. Um, if that gives any insight to anyone, it is a track of the counselor education program now.
Mhm. I think we answered everybody's questions. Anybody else have any questions? You can feel free to unmute yourself or ask in the chat. Anyone have any questions about school counseling, especially since Morgan's here? She knows way more about it than I do. No. I used to think that was the master's that I needed to do to be an academic advisor, but I learned that that's definitely more of a master's for K through 12. And since I wanted to work with college students, that's the higher ed master's is what I did. Sports psychologists are not counselors or therapists, so that's why we didn't include that in this presentation. But to be a sports psychologist, that means you're a psychologist, so you're going to essentially go for your doctorate. It could be a clinical psych doctorate, or maybe there's one specifically on sports psychology. So that's something I would recommend, that you interact with some sports psychologists, find some alumni on LinkedIn, or reach out to our professors that teach sports psychology and find out from them what you need to do to go towards your doctorate. And again, our website here has a bunch of information on applying towards the doctorate. So anything with the word psychologist typically is going to be a doctorate and typically requires research experience. So if you're not already a research assistant, look into gaining research experience, which our website has our presentation on research if you missed that earlier this month. So research is big, because again, when you're doing your doctorate, you're focusing on researching the therapy or researching the mental illness, and how can we, make it better? How can we fix it or expand on it? You can still be a therapist, like one of the counseling masters that we mentioned, and work with athletes, work with performance. So if you want to do your therapy program, whether it's rehabilitation counseling or an LMHC or an LCSW, and still work with athletes and coaching and performance and things like that. So that's still an area as well. Jennifer says she's doing the RBT certification right now, so you can ask her if you're interested in RBT. RBT is a really cool job, pays pretty well for just having your associate's degree. So we do have a lot of psych majors that are RBTs, and you get to work typically with kids that have autism or similar disorders. So it's actually a really cool job. I think that's all our questions, though. I don't see anybody else.
I think someone asked one right above Jennifer.
Oh, I missed it. Specific types of internships or research labs. You don't need research if you're going towards counseling. You just need experience helping others. And that's what we talked about. Here's some places that you could volunteer at that's helpful, that's somewhat related, or especially working with the types of clients you want to work with. So if you want to work with teens or you want to work with kids, you could look for specific organizations for that. So RBT is a registered behavior technician. UCF has a class. It's with UCF continuing education, so it's actually pretty pricey. You can also look for RBT jobs, and they might pay for you to do that class. So I would recommend going on like Indeed.com and looking for registered behavior technician positions. And they'll probably say preferred to be licensed already, but you can still apply anyways, and they'll often pay for you or help you get to that licensure. Okay, now I think that's all our questions, maybe. If you have questions and we didn't get to address it here, please email us at psychadvising@ucf.edu, and Morgan and myself, we will respond to you as fast as possible. I really appreciate you guys being here today. If you have additional questions, like I said, reach out to us and we'll help you out as much as we can. And again, I hope you'll find a mentor that's going to continue to guide you, because like I said, I'm not a counselor. I have some experience, but definitely finding someone that's going to be helpful to you too, I think. All right. Good luck, everybody. Have a good one. Bye.